We're going to be turning to Scripture to Matthew chapter 6, and I'd ask you to turn there. And while you're turning there, I'm remembering being a college kid, and during that time in my life, I would come home every couple months or so, whenever I needed to do laundry or have a decent meal. So I would come home, and my favorite memory of everything that I lived through during my college years, one of my favorite remembrances is coming home and talking to my dad. Because something changed. I don't know, our relationship changed when all of a sudden I didn't live there anymore. I was kind of a guest from that point on. But when I would come home, my dad would take this intense interest in me. And he'd sit there with me. And usually it would unfold something like this. It would be, late into the night, 11, 12, 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, just my dad sitting there on the floor in the kitchen, me sitting on the countertop, and we're just talking about everything you can imagine, about what I'd been learning, about classes I'd been taking, about stuff I'd been doing, about his work, about the economy, about politics, about God, about the church, about everything. And there was this intense connection, and I knew that my dad was interested in me. And I learned stuff from him. And ultimately, all of those long, late-night conversations affected the way I lived. They changed how I lived. They changed how I walked through this world. And here's the thing. Jesus, if you're going to open the Scriptures to Matthew 6, 9 through 13, you'll kind of see something like this. Jesus is, in a sense, saying, look, something kind of like that actually needs to happen between you and God. And so Jesus answers the disciples' questions. And in this one particular instance, he teaches them about prayer. And in a nutshell, what you find Jesus saying here is, look, it's about having a talk with Dad, about what matters to Dad and what matters to you. That's what it is in a nutshell. I mean, we make all kinds of things out of prayer. We make it a ceremony. We make it a ritual. We make it a kind of a discipline. We make it something we try to impress other people with. We make it something that we think has magical power. But in a nutshell, as Jesus brings it to us, he says, look, it's a talk with Dad about what matters to Dad and what matters to you. That's it at the core. And it's not something that is just for the pastors or the priests. It's for every single person to be able to have that kind of a talk with Dad about what matters to Dad and what matters to you. What you'll see in Scripture, though, is that ultimately the talk with Dad is meant to lead into a real walk with Dad. I want us to get that today. So here, let's look at what Jesus taught. So Matthew 6, 9 through 13. This, then, is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us all our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Okay, quick show of hands. How many of you here have at some point in your life memorized the Lord's Prayer? Most. Okay, now another hand. How many of you are trespasser people? Come on. Okay, how many of you are debts and debtor people? This creates confusion. That's just a problem. But anyway, this prayer, we call it the Lord's Prayer, but in a sense what Jesus called it was the disciples' prayer. It's like, hey, look, this is how you guys are to pray. It's what needs to be part of your talk with Dad. And if we can see through what Jesus is showing us here, it's not just something that we can deal with by memorizing and then rattling off from rote memory. I don't believe that's what Jesus had in mind. But that is what we sometimes do with this, right? We kind of make it this Formula One direct dial to God kind of deal. And I don't know that that's what Jesus had in mind. Now, a second way we can look at it is as a model prayer. We can go, okay, this is an example of kind of the type of stuff that should be a part of our conversation with God. And that's right. But today I want us to look at this in a kind of a third light. And to understand that Jesus is showing us, look, these are the things. These are the things that really matter. When all is said and done, when everything is assessed, These things matter. These things should be a part of what you're talking to your dad about. But not only that, these things are what form the essence of a blessed life. And so I want us to look at this example of what prayer is all about for some indicators from Jesus about how to live. Not just about how to do a religious exercise, but how to live. And so we're going to go through this one by one and look at these things. The first part of the prayer that Jesus teaches is, Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Now, this is interesting. How many of you here in this room have used the word hallowed in the last 1 week? Just in everyday conversation, like you're at Starbucks and you're like, hey, hallowed, what's up? This doesn't happen. It's something that it's kind of arcane to us, but we understand the essence of it. In the core is the word holy. And really what Jesus is showing us is, look, your starting point is to know and acknowledge who God is as entirely separate from everything, including the very best that this world has to offer. That above and beyond everything that your eyes can see, that he is entirely separate and above and greater and more glorious than everything else. He's holy. And you know what? God doesn't necessarily need to be reminded of that fact, but you know who does? Me and you. We need to be reminded of that fact because, man, we get tantalized with everything that's out there in front of us at that shop and that dealership and that strip mall and that catalog and that internet site and fill in the blanks. And we get tantalized by it and mesmerized by it and obsessed with it. And Jesus is saying there needs to be an unhinging from that. There needs to be a distancing from that. And a place where you are